Hello friends and welcome to lesson 4 of unit 2 where we are going to talk about the cooperative sector. So the learning outcomes for this lesson would be we'll talk about the joint sector and connected with that we'll talk about the joint stock. We'll also talk about cooperative sector, privatization and disinvestment, and then we'll take up a case study. So when we talk about joint sector, as we know, we have talked about the private sector and the public sector. How we divide is based on the ownership. So many times the public sector, where the government is doing all the things, and as you might have seen the infrastructure development in our country, like all the flyovers, where the government is not having enough money to invest, so they ask the private sector to join hands with them. So that is what we call as a joint sector. So if the ownership in the joint sector is more than 51%, so the control remains with the government. But if the ownership is less than 51%, then the government cannot manage, and then the private sector takes the management of the company. And you can have more than one private sector players in the joint sector. And connected with that, we'll talk about the joint stock company also. And then comes the cooperative sector. So cooperative sector we'll discuss separately in detail. So at present, when I say private sector, public sector and joint sector, so private sector, so all the investment is by the private sector. In the public sector, everything is by the government. And in the joint sector, it's a combination of private and public sector, depending on the ownership, which if it is more than 51% or more, then the government has the ownership of the company in terms of managing the company. So why there is a need for the joint sector? So number one is that many times, as I said earlier, the government may not be able to fund all the projects. And in order to have a social control, they would like to keep the ownership. And secondly, for the regional development, as we were talking about the roads and bridges and these flyovers which are coming, so we want the development, overall development, and we pick some of the regions and we want that area to be developed, and we want the participation of the private sector, whereas government is also there. And also the mobilization of resources, which is the biggest factor for the joint sector. So collaboration of government and the private sector, and these are the three major things which the government sector or the public sector looks at to enter into the joint sector. Now, when we talk about any examples, so these are the three biggest examples, like the Indian Oil and Gujarat State Fertilizers and Chemicals Limited, like Oil and Natural Gas Commission of India, ONGC. So these all undertakings are owned, controlled and managed jointly by the government, private entrepreneurs and public at large. So my question to you is, please think about that. What do you think Maruti Udyog Limited is? Is it a private sector company, public sector company, or a joint sector company? You have guessed it right. So Maruti Udyog Limited is a joint sector company. Now Suzuki has been able to leverage its ownership because it has more stake in the company now. So when it started, that was in, we'll discuss the history of this. So when it started, the equity structure was 80% of Government of India and 20% of Suzuki Motor Company, which it was known at that point of time. As on today, it is more than 51% share of Suzuki, and the rest is with the public. So basically, this project was conceived by Sanjay Gandhi, son of the late Prime Minister Indira Gandhi, way back in 1981. And so Maruti Udyog Limited was incorporated under the Companies Act. And then The joint venture agreement was signed in 1982, and the plant that we have is in Gurgaon, the biggest plant. So, in all, they have around six plants, and the market share, as you know, has been around 40 to 50%. And they have around 20 joint ventures for the various components for the cars which they manufacture. So when we talk about joint stock companies, so it can be private, public, or all private, but it is not one stakeholder. There are many people who are contributing, who are investors. So what are the merits of a joint stock company? So you can see all these big names that you see. Baxter is a big company from North America. Oracle, HP, Citibank, Sony, right? Xerox, Unilever, so Siemens, Colgate, you name Nissan, right? Ford, Pfizer. So all these are joint stock companies. So what are the merits why they go for joint stock? You have limited liability, transfer of interest. That means anytime you can go and sell the shares because it is a public limited company, you can do that. And there is always scope for expansion. They can scale up very fast. And also, generally, it is seen that they have professionally managed companies. What are the demerits? Because so many stakeholders are there, so there is a complexity in running the company. There is lack of secrecy because, as per the Act, uh, Companies Act, you have to make everything transparent. Also, there is conflict of interest because there are so many parties involved. Let's talk about the cooperative sector. The cooperative sector is owned and operated by actually the workers, the producers or the suppliers of the raw material. So if the workers become the owners, so that is what we call as the cooperative sector. So you make a society which you call as a cooperative society, and these workers are the members of that society, and so that is how these societies can be registered, and this is a cooperation of the workers and the people who actually become the stakeholders. So the biggest example in India is of Amul, and I don't know how many of you know the full name of Amul. It is Anand Milk Union Limited. So this is the success story of Amul. Dr. Varghese Kurin, who had been studying abroad, came to India, and he had one dream because in India there was a lot of milk deficiency. So India was very milk deficient, and the dream of Dr. Varghese was that he wanted to make India the largest producer in the world, and he did that. So the story started in Anand in Gujarat, and that is what the name is, Anand Milk Union Limited. And he wanted all the farmers in the dairy farming to become the owners, and that is how he started this company or the cooperative society. And today it is one of the biggest societies in the world, and Amul has around 200 brands, and he is known as the milkman of India. And rest, you know, is history. Similarly, another example I would like to talk about is IFCO. IFCO is Indian Farmers Fertilizer Cooperative Limited. So they have around 40,000 member societies, and there are 55 million. So that means around how much you can say is 55 lakh, right? 550 lakh farmers they have. That means 5 crore 50 lakhs. And they have around 19 subsidiary companies all over the globe outside India. Another example is Lizard Papad. There was one single woman who was idle, and she thought that she can start making papads. And she then talked to another seven of her friends in the neighborhood, and they started making papads. And they took a loan of 80 rupee from one of the suppliers. And today, what you see, Lizard Papad growing from 80 Indian rupees to 800 crore business empire. And this society is with the name of Shri Mahila Griha Udyog Lizard Papad. So that is the women power, the women's strength, which symbolizes the lizard papad. Another, if we talk of North India and Punjab, it is Milkfed, and Verka is another society which is into the milk production. Let us talk about privatization and disinvestment. We talked about the public sector, we talked about how efficient and effectively they have been performing their duties. And then we talked about accountability. We also talked about Right to Information Act, and which has made the government accountable. But still, there are many public sector enterprises which have not been doing well. So let's talk about privatization and disinvestment. Firstly, we need to understand what's the difference between privatization and disinvestment. So basically, privatization is part of disinvestment. So when you're disinvestment, that means the dilution of common stake, where the government is selling its share and it is giving away. So that is what is disinvestment. So when the disinvestment is to the tune of more than 50%, wherein the government control is less than 50%, that is what we call as the privatization, because the management goes in the hands of the private sector, and that is where we call is privatization. But when we are diluting and keeping it below 50%, right, the stake which I am selling to the private sector, then we call that as a disinvestment. So let us look at the impact of privatization. If we look at, we take the figures in 2020 for the last 10 years. So this data has been taken for the central public sector enterprises. So in this diagram, what you are seeing is the green one. The green bars are before the privatization, and the pink bars are after the privatization. So if we look at the net worth, so it has gone to around 3,000, right? So in 3,000 crores of the net worth. Whereas if I take the average of the peer firms, average of all the firms in that category, again it is up and almost 3.5 times. If I talk of the gross revenue, so that is much higher. And again, if I take the average of the peer firms, again it is very high. So that means because of the efficiency and effectiveness which the private sector has to use the resources, so the gross revenue and net worth goes much higher. But there is always a social aspect which has to be looked at. So you have to keep a balance, and we'll talk through a case study about that also. So if I take one public sector enterprise, which is Bharat Heavy Electricals, huge investment government has done, and it has been doing well. So if I look at the revenues, and if we just compare in 2019 to 2020, that is the first quarter, that is the first quarter of 2019 to the first quarter of 2020, it has gone down from 4.8 to 4.5, right? So, sorry, from 4.8 to minus 5.9. So, whereas the revenue in crores was almost 6,000, it has come down to 4,500. And the earnings from 4.8, it has gone down to minus 5.9. So there is a big worry about this public sector enterprise, which is a huge one. So if we look at the disinvestment targets in India, if we start from 2014 and compare that with the present scenario, so the government has taken really a big target for disinvestment. So as we had seen after the ninth year plan, so we are looking at that if the public sector enterprises are not performing and have been in losses for so many years in the last 1 decade, then either they are disinvesting to some extent, and in many companies they are going for full privatization. So if you look at the figures, so one is, and this also reduces the fiscal deficit. This is one of the tools as we discussed when we started with the learning objectives. So if you look at 14, 15, where when we talk about the the target was 26,000 crores, and we were able to get the actuals, that the proceeds from the disinvestment, which was not bad, around 24,000 crores. And look at 17-18. Look at 17-18. So it is around 1 lakh crore, and we were able to get the proceeds almost of the same amount, 2018-19. So from 2017, we are really onto the sick public sector enterprises and trying to revive them. In 2019, the target has gone to 1,05,000 crores, so it has increased. So still the numbers are coming. So far, we have been able to get the proceeds of around 17,000. So these figures are still awaited. If we look at how the public sector enterprises have been doing, and especially at the central level, the central public sector enterprises, so there are around 82 which have just come up and they have to commence their operations. The active are 257, and profit making are 184, loss making are 71, and the new CPEs which are going to come are 17, and we have already liquidated 9 of them. So the 71 loss making, so how much loss they have been making is minus 13, around 13%, and the profit 4.35, so that is not gelling well. So this is the status of around 339 CP SCs, that is Central Public Sector Enterprises. Now let us take a case study. You have been hearing about Air India a lot, and if you look at their performance from 2007 to 2016, so they have been in continuous losses. And if I say from 2007 to 2016, the maximum losses in 2011-12 to the tune of 7,500 crores. So continuously they have been in losses. So Air India reported operating profit of 105 crores in 15-16. They wanted to revive it, while the annual interest burden was around 4,000. So you see, crore. With the interest which they are paying is around 4,000, and they were not able to even cater to even 10% of that by the operating profit. So recently Niti Aayog even waived off their loans right, to the tune of 30,000 crores. But still, it has been in losses. And when I say 30,000 crores, that is the public money, the tax money, your and my money. So, as on today, the government has already decided for disinvestment. So the Air India losses is more than 50,000 crores as on today, and the total debt is 55,000 crores, in which the working capital debt is 33,000. So they can't operate because the working capital, that is the money in order to run the company, that is what is needed. So their annual interest, which they have to pay, is about 21% of their turnover, one fourth of their turnover, which is 4,500. That is the interest they have to pay, and it is building up every year. So the carrier is running on 30,000 to 31 crore bailout, which I said was done in 2012. So what should be done? What do you think we should be doing with Air India? Because it is a public sector company. This is our national carrier also. Now, British Airways, they were also in losses, but then they changed the management, they changed the whole structure, and they were able to revive. Uh, just to give you some more figures, so what government has decided, your views may be that we don't want to keep it. The government felt that, okay, we'll sell 74% of the stake, and in 2019, so they invited the expression of interest from the other airlines, and there were many like Indigo was there, Vistara was there, Qatar Airlines was there, so they all were interested. But the clauses, the conditions that the government had put, like the 26% stake of the government, they were not very happy with that. So no investor turned up. Now the union government has given the nod, that given the permission that 100% ownership can be given to the NRIs, because they want to keep the Indian entity of this national carrier. So we are not sure what is going to happen to Air India, whether there will be any takers, because huge debt. So it is going to be a huge liability for anyone who is going to invest in this or who is going to buy Air India. So in general, if we talk about what is the future, the Niti Aayog has recommended strategic sale of over 40 PSUs and closing of 26 SICK PSUs. So they have been very strict now on the SICK units. So that is all from my side. Let me summarize the things for you. So we talked about the joint sector, the joint stock, cooperative sector, privatization and disinvestment, and then we took up the Air India case study, whether it should be disinvested fully privatized, and how the government has decided and why the investors are not coming forward. So here is a small quiz for you. So the question number 1 is, Maruti Udyog Limited was incorporated in which year? You need to tell me that. Citibank is what sort of sector company? And third is IFCO stands for. So MUL was incorporated in the year 1981. Citibank is a joint stock company, and IFCO stands for Indian Farmers Fertilizer Cooperative Limited. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, feel free to write to me. And this is the complete case study if you want to go into the details of what we discussed as some part of Air India. So the complete case study with the history and how it started, how it had been doing, and how at this point of time there are no takers. So thank you very much. See you next time with the next lesson. Bye for now. Shabba khair.